Okay, let's transition over to talking about MIDI. Now, MIDI works a lot different than audio recording, primarily because when we're recording MIDI, the thing we need to remember is that MIDI is data. It's ones and zeros, right? We don't really need to go through an audio interface for MIDI because it's already digital. Like if I press a note here, it sends a message to the computer that just says note number 60 was pressed and how hard I pressed it. That's all it says. So my computer then has to take that information and say, okay, note number 60 was pressed. What do we do with that? If we're connected to an instrument, then we know, okay, make that note sound, and that's easy enough to do. So it's not analog anything. There's no, if I look at a MIDI controller like this, there is no audio going down this wire, okay? This wire is USB wire. There's no sound in that. This keyboard can make 0 sounds, okay? This does not make any sound at all, except for like the plastic hitting together. Does not transmit any sound, I should say, to the computer, okay? All of the sounds are in the computer. MIDI keyboards just send note on and note off messages. And they can send a few other things too, but they don't, but primarily that's all they send. Okay, so with this section, we're going to go over everything you need to get set up to be able to input MIDI stuff, to record MIDI. We'll look at a bunch of different MIDI controllers, MIDI instruments, setting everything up, and then a couple tricks that are built into Live for having a really efficient workflow, including automatically recording everything you do all the time. It's a little freaky, but I'll show you, trust me. Okay, so let's dive in and talk about our hardware needs for MIDI recording. Okay, so when we talk about MIDI recording and MIDI hardware, what we're really talking about is some kind of MIDI keyboard, right? Now here's the thing. When we think about MIDI keyboards, we tend to think about things like this, okay? Now there's a lot going on here. What we have here is a piano-like keyboard, okay? So it's got the piano keys that you're familiar with. It also has some pads and some dials, okay? These can be mapped to do a whole bunch of different stuff. We'll come back and talk about those later. The keyboard part is what's going to play in notes. Now, what's interesting about this is that most MIDI controllers look like a piano keyboard. And the reason they do is because most people know what a piano keyboard does, right? But other than kind of tradition, there's no real reason that your MIDI device needs to be a piano-shaped one. They have MIDI devices for virtually everything if you want. You can find MIDI guitars, you can find MIDI saxophones, MIDI violins, MIDI cellos. So a keyboard is probably the most versatile thing because we can just kind of flop our hands on it and do whatever we want. But if you are skilled with another instrument, you should totally get a MIDI controller that is that instrument, you know, like do what's comfortable. I'll show you a MIDI guitar in a couple videos from now, but back to hardware needs. You need a MIDI controller of some kind if you want to do any kind of MIDI recording and playing. Okay, so this is one. The good thing about these MIDI controllers is that they are made of plastic. They're relatively cheap, you know, like this one is this is, let's see, a Novation Launch Key Mini, and I don't remember exactly, but it's probably about $100 or less. These are not designed to go on tour and be on stage, really. They're kind of cheap plastic things, and they don't need to be anything bigger than that. I showed you earlier the Roland C board that I have connected to this computer. That's a fancy one. That's like a really fancy one. This is a cheaper one. So don't get anything fancy. If you want a piano-like one, all you really need is some keys, and then you can decide if you want the keys to be full-size piano keys. Do you want them to be weighted keys so they feel like a piano? Most of these are not going to feel like a piano. They're going to feel like pieces of plastic. And that's kind of what they're designed to do. If you want one that feels like a real piano, then you're going to be spending a little bit more. But when you're like programming drums, you don't care if it feels like a real piano or not. This is really our only piece of hardware that we need, is some kind of MIDI keyboard. We don't need an audio interface, although an audio interface may help you. And I'll explain that in just a second. Actually, I'll explain that right now. So when we plug in one of these to our computer, here's how we're going to do it. If you have one like this or anything that's new-ish in the last like 5 or so years, it's going to have a USB output on it. This one, where'd it go? Right here, USB. So I can plug this in just with USB. That's all I need to do. So a lot of audio interfaces have a USB port for this reason. You can plug it into the USB port on the audio interface, but you don't need to. You can put it in any USB port, it's just fine. But if you have anything older, like a bigger keyboard or something, it might have actual MIDI outputs on it. So I was looking around my studio for something that has old school MIDI outputs. And the only device I could find quickly accessible was this. This is a Novation Remote Zero. So this has no keyboard, although they do make a version with a keyboard. It's just controllers. So it's faders, so you can map this to your the faders on the screen. It's got some drum pads and some dials that you can map to do different things. I used to use this as a live performance tool. But on the back, you can see that it has, where are they? Here. These are MIDI outputs and inputs, okay? So they have this 5-pin connection. So I can't easily plug this into my computer. So if I really wanted to use this with the MIDI ports, I need to get a MIDI cable, and I need to have a box that converts a MIDI signal to a USB signal, okay? I can get a cheap little box that does that, or a lot of audio interfaces have that built in as well. So something to consider when you're buying an audio interface: if you want to use an older keyboard like that, you're going to need one that has MIDI ports. Now, luckily, this one has both. It has MIDI ports and a USB right there. So I can just plug this in with USB, which is how I used to use it. So we really just got to plug this into our computer, and then we're good to go. There's some setup stuff we need to do in live, so we'll do that in just a second. But I want to go into another kind of like buyer's guide thing, and also show you how MIDI guitars work while we're on the topic, because I happen to have one right here. Okay, I'm going to talk to the guitar nerds for a minute here. I say guitar nerds affectionately because I am obviously one of them. But if you're not a guitar nerd, this should be useful to you also, just to know that the vast different kinds of MIDI controllers that are out there, they don't all have to look like pianos. So when it comes to MIDI guitars, there are really kind of 3 products on the market right now that are interesting to me. There's a ton of products on the market, but these are the ones that have caught my attention. The wackiest one is this one. This is made by a company out of Nashville called Artiphone. They call this the Instrument One. This is weird because if you can see it, it's got no strings, but like just kind of a rubber fretboard and string feeling thing. So it's pressure sensitive. You can play it like a guitar. You can play it like a drum. You can even use an app, like a phone, and bow it virtually and treat it like a violin. It's quite versatile. It's weird and quirky. I've goofed around with it, but I've never really recorded anything with it. It's not quite as responsive as I would love. But I kind of dig the design of it. It's cool. It's got a little speaker built in, so you can do some stuff with it if you connect it to a phone. Another one is made by a company called Zivix, which is actually here in Minnesota, I think, still. This is called the Jam Stick. You can get these are kind of all over the place right now. This is actually like an early prototype. Don't tell them I still have it. I did some work for them in the early days of this product. The thing that's cool about this is that it has real strings and they're just muted, so you don't really hear those pitches. And then you just play like normal, and all the sensors and everything that it needs to make the MIDI data are in the fretboard. I think they're infrared, actually. So it's really responsive, it's really accurate, and they have a full size version of it now. They have a full guitar version that I haven't played around with yet, but that looks really cool because it gives you the real feel of a guitar, like it's real strings. But at the moment, my favorite MIDI guitar device is this. So this is a normal guitar. This is just any electric guitar. You can put this on it. This is a MIDI pickup. And what's super cool about this is that this is a wireless MIDI pickup. So this is the Fishman Triple Play, which is the best one that I've found. So what happens is, this is kind of the brains of it right here. And it goes through this wire, and then there's a little pickup right there. That's the actual MIDI pickup. So what that pickup has to do is figure out what note I'm playing. So it has to do kind of a lot of computation, convert it to a MIDI signal, and send it over Bluetooth to my computer. It's weird, but it works really well. So I have it connected right now, and I have it set to a piano. So you can see in live, it's coming in here, and there's a piano sound on it. So this is the benefit of like MIDI recording, right? Like if I want to play piano, I could just play guitar. Like you can hear it kind of stutter a little bit sometimes. You can clean that up in the MIDI, but it's actually pretty, it's, you know, pretty responsive and pretty fast. So I can just map my guitar to a piano. If I want to do something different, let's say I want to map to strings. Let's go to orchestra strings. Let's say cello. Okay, I want to play the cello. Sure. See, it's like really responsive and really nice. I can play chords. It's great. So I'm better at this than I am at piano. So sometimes I enter notes this way. Most of the time I use a piano because I can't play piano enough to do what I need to do. So there's a ton of different MIDI controllers out there. There's like literally tons of them. Okay, so let's do another little buyer's guide segment, and I'll show you what I would buy if, depending on what you're interested in doing. All right, let's talk about what you should get here. So if you're going to buy a MIDI controller, the things you need to think about are really how big you want it to be and how many extra buttons and things you want on it. So this is the one I was just holding up. You know, it's got 2 octaves of notes and maybe 16 pads and 8 knobs, a couple other things. So that's small. You're never going to play piano on that, right? Like, but you can put in a melody, you can put in a drum beat, you can put in bass lines. It's kind of perfect for a small studio. So there's a bunch of different companies that make these. These Novation ones, the Novation ones I find to be really reliable, really solid, and very affordable. I've just been a fan of their MIDI controllers for a while. So I like this one for just small little stuff. This is great. You know, it's $100. It's great. You don't need to spend more than $100 on this. They also have bigger ones. Here's a 37 key one. So it's exactly the same, except it's got more keys. So, you know, this one's $200, 41, 49. Okay. So this is the Novation Launch Key line. All of these are great. This is a different line. I have one of these and I took it to the studio, but I've been kicking around one of these for years. I think this is also a launch key. It's a launch key 49 with weighted keys. So it's a little bit fancier, but seriously, I've had this exact keyboard for probably 5 years, and it's, you know, gotten thrown around and all kinds of weird stuff, and it's super solid. So these Novation ones are great. So that's what I'd recommend. You know, go to this one and just say, like, do you want a little tiny one that you can just play in some notes, or something fancier? Now, if you want to look at different kinds of MIDI controllers, you could look around Amazon, but you might want to look around some other music-specific websites to find some of the custom controllers. And here is that MIDI pickup that I like, the Fishman Triple Play. It's a bit expensive, $430, but it's really the best MIDI pickup for a guitar that I've ever used. It's really solid. It works great. So highly recommend that. So those are my recommendations. If you're going to buy something, buy one of those. There's really no reason that you need to spend much more than $100 on a good MIDI keyboard that you can do everything you need on. Okay, let's get our MIDI controller to talk to live. This is super easy. So we do need to go to settings, or our preferences. And what's cool about this is that if everything works right, you should only have to do this one time. Once you set up a keyboard, it's set up for good, even if you unplug it and replug it in later. Okay, so we're going to go to preferences. That's up in your live menu, and then settings, or you can press Command comma, or I think Alt comma on a PC. Okay, we're going to go to this link, tempo, and MIDI tab. Okay, and then we're going to go down here. So we have 2 different chunks of stuff here. We have this MIDI where we see all these drop-down menus, and then we have inputs and outputs. Okay. So in MIDI, what we're really looking for here is any kind of control surface. Okay. So like the push is a control surface. I don't know why it doesn't see my push 3 right now, but it still sees my push 2, which is not plugged in, which is why it's grayed out here. Okay, here it sees the launch key mini. So let me define control surface. Control surface is something like this that has a bunch of controllers on it. It's a little different than a MIDI keyboard. However, a MIDI keyboard could be both. So like this one has MIDI keys, but it also has some controller things, knobs, faders, and things like that. So it can be both. If I just want to play notes, then I'm going to go down to this input section. So if you're setting up a control surface, you need to make sure it shows up here. It might require you to install some drivers or something like that on your computer, any software that came with it. So you're going to look for it here and set up input and output. Just select the same thing all the way across. But for your average run-of-the-mill MIDI keyboard, okay, so here's where you see my push 3, my Fishman triple play, that's my MIDI guitar, some other USB MIDI interface that it doesn't know about, and my 2 Seaboard controllers. So you don't see this one because it's not plugged in right now. So I'm going to plug it in and you'll see what happens. This is how easy this can be. So I'm going to plug this in with the USB cable to my computer. And if we look down here, there it is. No edits there, it just popped up. Okay, so here it is. It shows up twice, and a lot of keyboards and things will show up twice. We can kind of open it and see some settings, but we shouldn't need to go into there at all. So once it shows up, and again, it should show up automatically. Really, any keyboard that's USB should show up automatically. If it doesn't, check to see if there's any drivers or any software that needs to be installed for that keyboard. But most of them won't need anything at this point. Okay, so now we're going to go over to all these little checkboxes. First thing you want to do is make sure the first checkbox under track is turned on. Okay, so turn those on. The rest of these you don't have to turn on. What the track setting is going to do is say this can put things into a track. In other words, this thing can play notes. That's what it's allowed to do. If we go to sync, we can say this thing can control the tempo. If we turn on remote, we're going to say this thing can control the transport of live, essentially. Like if your keyboard has a play, stop, pause button on it, you can turn this on and it'll be able to control live. This keyboard, this Novation launch key, doesn't have a play, stop, pause, so I'm just going to leave it off. And MPE. MPE is kind of like a high resolution MIDI. Some keyboards can do it and some can't. These Seaboard ones can do it, so it's turned on. The Ableton Push 3 can do it, so it's turned on. This launch key cannot do it, so it's not turned on. So if your keyboard is capable of it, turn it on. We're going to talk more about MPE in just a few videos. So just kind of hold on to that for a minute. I'll show you what MPE looks like. Okay, now whatever settings you do there, you might as well do the same settings for the outputs. So launch key, turn on track. I probably don't need these other ones. I'm not sure why they're on. And that's it. So now if I unplug this keyboard and then plug it back in later, the same information is going to come back up. And then also remember, I think we talked about this in the first class, we have in the live interface this special little tiny square right up there. That little square has one function and one function only. It's going to light up when it sees any MIDI information at all. So when in doubt, plug in your keyboard, smash your fingers on the keyboard. So there we go. There is that light. Okay. So always just look for that. It's a really quick way to say, is MIDI working? Yep, MIDI is working. So that's your setup. It's actually really quite simple. Okay, there's a weird little problem in MIDI sometimes that can come up from time to time. And there's a kind of a strange setting to fix it. So in this video, I just want to tell you what that weird problem is so that you know how to spot it and then how to fix it. So if I make a MIDI clip, I'm not even going to record something now. I'm just going to like put it in. Okay. Here's a MIDI note. Okay. And I think I still have a piano loaded up. Nope. I have a cello, but that's great. Okay. Let's not loop it. Let's just hear it. Okay, so what a MIDI note is it's really two like messages from the keyboard. It says, when I play a note, it says a note has been pressed and then the velocity at which it has been pressed, so the volume. Okay? And then it doesn't say anything else until I lift up my finger, and then it says that note has been lifted up, sort of. So nothing's happening in this area. It's just waiting for the note off message. So if this was to happen, watch closely what I'm about to do here. So here's the beginning of the note. That's where that message is that says, I played a note. So if that goes back, okay, now I'm going to start playing from right here and stop playing there. What's going to happen? Nothing. We're not going to hear that note because we didn't get the note on message. We didn't get the part of the message that says a note has been played. This used to be a really big problem, and it still is a problem if you're using a DAW that doesn't know how to compensate for that. So what we need to do is get the start of the message over the start of the clip. Now you might think, well, that's really obvious, but watch this. What if I was to do this? Boom. That's all it takes. Now I'm not going to hear that note. Right? It looks perfect, but I'm not going to hear it because the start of that note is just a hair off. Okay, so the solution is go up to Options and then Chase MIDI Notes. What that means is that Live is going to kind of figure out what notes are happening and make their sound anyway. So now we'll be able to hear this note. There it is. Just be sure that Chase MIDI Note option is on. Once you get into doing more complex MIDI sequences, that will be something that drives you nuts if you don't have that Chase MIDI Note setting on. So leave that on. Okay, next I want to talk a little bit about MIDI signal flow. How MIDI travels around within Live once it gets there. This is important, especially when it comes to effects. Okay, so I have a MIDI channel here. So when I play my little Novation Launch Key Mini here, it's going to come into this track. And the reason it's going to come into this track is because here on my inputs, it says all ins. That means it's listening to all MIDI devices that I have connected to this computer. Any of them are going to come in on this track right now. But they're also going to come into this track, right? The reason that I know they're going to route to this track only is because this one is armed to record. Okay? So that means that this is the only one that is going to accept the MIDI data coming in. Okay? And it's got cellos on it right now, which is great. Okay, so the MIDI notes come in and they go into whichever track is armed to record, whichever MIDI track is armed to record. Now let's look down at device view. So I have an instrument here, okay? This whole thing is this particular instrument. It's a long one. So we can see over here the dots, right? I think I've talked about these before. These dots mean it's data. It's just numbers going in, right? But on the other side of the instrument, we see an audio signal, right? That is audio data. So this instrument is converting MIDI data, the dots, to audio data, the sound levels, okay? So from here, our audio signal now goes out and then over to the main audio track here. You can see it coming in right there. And there it is. Okay. Now let's go back here because I want to point out two more things. If we go to MIDI effects and we put a MIDI effect on this track, let's say arpeggiator. Okay, I dropped that on the track. You could see here, here's our MIDI dots, and here's our MIDI dots, meaning the arpeggiator needs to deal with MIDI information. It can't deal with audio. So we can put as many MIDI effects as we want on this track, but they must come before the instrument. And Live's going to do that automatically. If I try to drag this out over here, it's just going to say no and put it back over there. So MIDI effects need to come before the instrument because they deal with MIDI data. Audio effects if I put an audio effect on this track, it has come after the instrument, right? Because audio needs to come in and audio comes out. So audio effects can go after the instrument because we have essentially an audio signal after that. It's kind of a cool sound. Okay, so MIDI effects before the instrument, audio effects after the instrument. But either way, at the end of this chain of stuff, no matter how many things are in here, this signal goes up to our main or our master fader, sometimes referred to as the 2-track. I like to call it the master fader. That's just what I learned, but all of the above are true. Okay, now let's start recording some stuff. Okay, let's record some stuff. So here's what we're going to do. We've got this one track set up with my Novation. It's got cello sounds on it. Let's delete this echo and this arpeggiator. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to go up to this 5th bar here just for fun. I kind of have an idea what I'm going to do with these first few bars, but so I'm going to put my cursor here. I'm going to start my metronome. I'm going to give myself a 1-bar lead in with the metronome. And then I'm going to turn the metronome on. Now I'm just going to play some fun, like I'm just going to noodle around in C major for a minute, I think, and play some cello-y stuff. And then I want to try to add some drums to it, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so I don't have to worry about my monitoring really at all here because there's no microphones that are recording into Live. And the MIDI signal that's being sent is just MIDI. It's not, there's no danger of it feeding back. So that is super easy. So I've got this armed to record, and now I'm going to go to my big record button and hit it. Okay, neat. That was cute. Let's go to another track here and let's put a drum machine on it. So I'm going to hide my filters here and let's see what we can do here. Now, I'm going to play in drums. So when I'm auditioning drums right now, I'm really just listening for the sounds, not the pattern that it's playing. Let's go down a ways. That's cool. We'll do that. So I'm going to throw that on this keyboard, or on this track. Now I have a drum kit. So now I'm going to play some notes and find I'm gonna find my drums. So you can see, if you look down here, you can see what notes I'm playing. Like there's no drum sound there. If I play a lower note, lower note, lower note, now I'm getting into the drums. So on my keyboard, if I want to get to the majority of the drums, I need to go down an octave with the octave button on this keyboard. All right. Okay, so let's try to record some drums. This is going to be a little sloppy, but because I'm going to try to hold the keyboard up so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I found that my main kick and snare I want is here and here. Okay, so let's try to record a beat with just those. So I'm on the next track. It's armed to record. Let's try it. Okay, hit spacebar to stop. Not bad. Wasn't perfect, but not bad. Okay, I sure wish I had some hi-hats in there. So let's find some hi-hats. Okay, there's my best hi-hat. So I could overdub on this track. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to record right on top of this track. But if I just hit record again a second time, it's going to overwrite what I have. Okay, and I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to click this little plus sign. Okay, that means MIDI overdub. So now that means that we're going to keep what's there and I'm going to add more to it. So let's try recording now. So I'm just going to play in a hi-hat and all the way through this, basically. Actually, maybe I'll have it enter right here with the rest of this. Okay, a little sloppy, so let's go in there and let's just select all of those and Command U for quantize. Okay, that should make it a little tighter, and maybe I'll actually quantize everything. Okay, now let's hear that. And we'll turn off the metronome. Turn our hi-hats down a little bit. I'm going to select them all and then just grab the hi-hat velocity and pull it down a little bit. That was a weird quantize error there. Okay, neat. So I recorded cello pad thing and some drums. Great. So let's move on. Okay, let's talk about comping and take lanes in the MIDI world. So what you just saw me do was use the overdub functionality to be able to play more MIDI notes and add on to a MIDI clip I had already made. It's like recording two things but keeping both of them, compiling both of them. Now that's not comping or overdubbing. Let's do a comping experiment here. So let's take my drums and let's just try to do something really simple, but I'm going to screw it up, and then we're going to overdub it. In fact, let's do this. Let's take 2 bars. Let's loop it. So we hit Command L. So I'm just going to record these 2 bars over and over and over and over and over, okay? And then we'll see if we can piece together a good take. So this is going to work basically the same as it works with audio. Here we go. Okay, let's keep that last one. All right, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to select Show Take Lanes. And here's all my takes at that, right? So let's zoom in. Okay, and the last one was kind of the best, but let's say I liked this, and this, and this, and this. Okay, there's my composite all put together. So this is going to be weird. Okay, I just grabbed random stuff, but really what I liked was this one all the way through. So let's hit return on that, and now I have the best take. Cool. So what we have here is essentially the same thing as in the audio realm, right? We could just record and record and record and go through and splice together the best take by showing the take lanes. You can see that it showed the take lanes for the couple times I did this, but it's not showing them separately of overdubbing. Here's one with the overdub and here's one without. So it's just showing my 2 takes. Great, so I'm going to hide those take lanes, show take lanes, cover them up, and move on. Okay, next let's talk about capture. That's the spooky thing where it just kind of tells you what you were just doing. Okay, has this ever happened to you? You're playing around on your MIDI keyboard or your guitar or whatever. And you find something that's cool. Like, where was that clap? There it is. And you're like, cool, that was great, but I got distracted and I lost it. I forgot what I was doing now. Or you figure out some harmony and you're like, oh, I got it. And then you can't find those notes again. Watch this. This is going to blow your mind. See this little square up here? This is called capture. If I just click on it, it's going to say, hey, here's the last couple things you were doing. So here's that beat. Right? It's just like magic. It's like it's always recording MIDI behind the scenes and just not telling you. So if I went up here and I said, that's a cool sound. I liked it. Ah, shoot, I wasn't recording. What am I going to do? Oh, hit capture. Boom. there's what I just played. It's like magical and awesome. So don't forget about that. There's nothing to set up or nothing to do. Just remember that if you're noodling around on a MIDI keyboard, and you aren't recording, you can always hit that capture button and get the last chunk of stuff that you were playing. It's almost creepy, but there it is. Okay, let's go over to session view and see if we can do the same types of things. So remember, we have basically the same mixer here. So we have the same cello section is loaded up, the same drums are loaded here. So if I want to record in session view, I'm just going to hit one of these record buttons and start playing. Gorgeous. Want to record another one? Just hit another button. Hit another button. We can go on all day. It's really simple, works just like audio recording. If I want to switch over to this one, we're going to switch over. Our arm to record is going to come with us in this case, and I can just play some drums. Okay, weird, but you get the point. Okay, so super easy. Everything comes right with us. We just hit record and on a MIDI track, and we're off and running. Okay, let's talk about velocity and editing our velocity. Now, I know that we looked at this a little bit already in the first class in this series, but I want to go into a little bit more detail here while it's in context of MIDI recording. So, remember, the velocity is the volume. If I play a note really soft on my keyboard, it's going to send a low velocity and therefore play a quiet note. If I play a note really hard, it's going to play a loud note using a loud velocity. But I can change it. Let's go to this one. So let's look at one of these clips. If I go down here, I'm going to grab this little bar and make this bigger. This is my velocity, okay? So why are they set the way they are? Because this is how I played it in. It recorded the pressure of me pushing every key, and this is how I did it. Okay? So I can do a few things with this. First, I could level them out. If I wanted to just flatten this, what I could do is select them all. I'm just going to click in this area and then select Command A. Okay, so they're all highlighted. So now I can grab one of them, it doesn't matter which one, and pull them down or pull them up and move them around. But if I want to just flatten them out, the fastest way to do it is just to smash them all up to the top and then pull them back down. That's going to like set them all to the top, and then you can pull them down and now they're all even. There's not a great reason to flatten them off like this, especially if you want them to sound natural and human. This is going to not do that. It'll be subtle though. So I'm going to say undo. Go back to the way I naturally played it in. Now another thing I could do here is give them a variation amount. So if we go to this deviation, I'm going to select all again, and this deviation I'm going to turn up a little bit here. So what that's going to do is each one of these is going to play within this range now. Okay? So it adds a little bit of randomness, and that can add a little bit of humanization and natural sound to it. So I've been having a lot of fun with this deviation thing lately, so that it just gives it a little more expressivity. Again, very subtle, but it's rather nice. I can use this ramp feature just to say, here, I'm going to turn off deviation for the moment. with this ramp, I can kind of say start low and go high, you know, and or the opposite, a high, start high, go low. I can do just kind of, you know, ramps with it, kind of give it direction. And then, of course, if I really just want to annihilate the stuff I played in, I can just hit randomize here, and I can keep hitting it over and over. And it's going to assign a random velocity to all the notes. This can be fun if you're just trying to switch things up and come up with some new ideas. So, something to play with. Now, if I should have said earlier, if you don't see your velocity window here, the place to get it is down here, okay? This tiny little arrow, click, and then say show velocity lane, okay? So now that we've done that, let's go to the chance lane and play around with that for a minute. Okay, let's look at the chance settings. Now this is really fun. Okay, for this one, let's go over to that drum track I made. So I'm going to go back over to arrangement view. I'm going to click my back to arrangement button, and let's go here to this one. Okay. So here's that beat I made. This very boring, uninteresting drum beat. Okay. Let's start it up here. Okay, so I'm going to take just my hi-hats. I'm going to highlight them all up here, and that's going to also highlight them down here. Okay, so we can see the velocity where I played them. They're kind of all over the place, which is fine, because that's how I played them. But now let's go to chance, and let's take those ones that are from the hi-hat, only the hi-hat notes, and pull chance down to around 50%. There we go. Now what this means is that for those hi-hat notes that are now down to 50%, you can see everything else is at 100% down in chance. Okay? What that means, this has nothing to do with velocity. This means that there's a 50% chance that those notes are going to play at all. Okay? So imagine that every time one of those hi-hat notes comes up, okay, the computer is basically rolling a two-sided dice, and it either says play or don't play, okay? And it's just going to do that. It's going to be different every single time. Okay, let's hear what it did. Okay, that's cool. If I want a little bit more, let's raise the chance. Kind of liked it more sparse. Okay, so there's holes in it, and that's kind of cool. So once you start programming more stuff and recording more stuff and building up whole tracks, you're going to find this to be really useful, that you can create kind of a system almost where there's a clip that has some notes that happen sometimes but not always. It's really fun to play around with. So explore that chance showing lane here. Of course, with chance, you can also randomize it. Just kind of set everything to a single value if you want. You can group things together, which would be the usefulness of that would, let's say, like for this bar, or here's let me give you a more useful one. Let's say I'm going to zoom out, and let's just say that all of these snare drums, okay, I want Live to decide whether or not to play that snare or not. But if it decides to not play the snare, I want it to not play any snares. I want to leave off the snare track. Okay, I could do that. What I do is I'm going to go into the chance lane. I'm going to highlight those snares. I'm going to say play all to group them together, now I have one chance thing for all of the snares. And if I want to undo this, I can just hit ungroup. But now it's going to decide to play the snares or not. Okay, decided to that time. Let's try again. Okay, this time it decided not to play the snare. So that's how you can use grouped notes together. Okay, let's move on and talk briefly about MPE stuff. Okay, MPE is a really interesting thing. It got added to Live in Live 11, and so it's kind of in its second big generation of it now with Live 12. And earlier I said it's like a high resolution MIDI. That's basically true. Now, not everything can use MPE right now. Only some MIDI controllers are capable of MPE, and only some instruments can do anything with it. So if we want to take a look at what we've got, we can go up here and we can go over to the MPE tab. And now, before you ask me, what does MPE even stand for? I don't remember. I'm not actually sure, and I think that there's actually even some debate about what it stands for. I like to think of it as like Super MIDI. That's what it stands for. So it gives us a couple new controls. So in the MPE tab, we have these two new lanes, kind of like velocity and chance that we saw before. This one is called slide, and this one is called pressure. I can see more if I go here. I can also see velocity, which we've already messed around with, so we know that it has velocity, and release velocity. Now, all of these things are only relevant to some instruments. I can't make anything in the slide lane because this instrument doesn't support anything in the slide lane. If you go to an instrument like Wavetable, you'll see that it has a lot of controls that say MPE on them. So those are going to give you some of these extra controls that you can play with. Some of them will add really nice, versatile effects to what you're playing in. It can make it much more expressive. That's the whole, well, I don't know if that's the whole point of MPE, but that's the most interesting thing about MPE to me, is that there's a lot more expressiveness in the keyboard when you're playing through something that supports MPE. That's why I like these Roland Seaboard keyboards, because they do support MPE. So play around with it. I don't want to spend too much time on it right now. We'll look at it again once we start deep diving into the instruments. But if you want to poke around, this is where you would find it in the MIDI settings. Okay, one last thing about MIDI recording before we move on. We can record automation with a MIDI device. Check it out. So what if I wanted to use one of these knobs to record automation? I can totally do that. So here's how I'm going to do it. Let's say this track here, this little drums thing right there. Let's get rid of this and just do that. So what I'm going to do is turn on this button. This is automation arm. So this basically means I'm about to record some automation. And if we're going to do it over top of a clip that already exists, we should turn on overdub as well. Okay. Now I'm going to go into the automation mode so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to press the letter A or go to view automation so I can see all this automation stuff, right? So now let's decide what we want to move around here. How about just this drum bus amount? We're probably not going to hear anything, but that's okay. Okay, so with all of these things turned on, I'm going to hit record and watch what happens. as I turn this knob, I am recording automation. Okay, and now I can play it back and it's there. You can see that automation moving down here. Now, you may wonder, how did I get that knob on that keyboard to control this? What's happening here is that this group of 8 knobs, you'll see this all over live. This like 8 knobs in a little 4x2 grid. You'll see that everywhere. And you'll see on all kinds of devices a set of 8 knobs. And what happens is, if you have 8 knobs on your device and one of these 8 knob things show up, most of the time they're going to automatically map. They call it auto map to the thing on the screen. Okay, so I can just turn these and they're automatically configured to control that set of 8 knobs. So that's how I just grabbed something and it turned something and it worked for that instrument because of that auto map feature. Now you can change that mapping and we'll talk a lot about that later. So file that away for the moment. Okay, let's move on. Okay, before we move on to the next section, I want to point out one kind of cool new thing that's here that we haven't talked too much about, and that is in a MIDI clip, you've got these transform and generate buttons. If you open these up, there's all these tools that, and this is all new in Live 12. You won't see this if you're in a 11, 10, whatever. There's all these tools that are effectively helping Live create things for you. So with the transform tools, if you've made something, you can go to these transform tools and say, make something different, mess it up, transform it. Or if you don't have anything, you can go here and just say, make a chord progression for me. And, you know, like kind of randomize something, and it's going to stick to the key and make you a chord progression, right? It's pretty wild. So these generate things are just going to like generate music for you. I've had some really good experience with them, just using them as a way to create something random and then kind of sculpt it and play with it and make it my own. They're really great. So there's a bunch of different options here, and I just want to point out that we will go through how to use all of this, all of the transform options and all of the generate options in the next class in this series. In part 3, we get into a bunch of MIDI tools where we will go over how to use every single one of these. I'm thinking about making a whole class just based on like, let's have Live create something for us, but I don't know if I'm actually going to do that. So more details on these in depth in the next series. For now, I want to move on and talk about tuning systems.